Yeah. Okay. So this is a reply to Logan over at Metal and Beer Snob. I think I got that right. It's not Drunken Metalhead Musings anymore. Metal Beer Snob. We've gone through some name changes. Nevertheless, okay. He put out a video. I think I'll put a link to his original video, and then after that, I think Rick put a reply, and he kind of, Logan, good dude, put together a video talking about 2012 to 2016. It was a metal renaissance, or extreme metal renaissance, and had asked people in the VC to give their opinion, if you agree with him, if we don't, why, and he kind of put together a few points as to why he is trying to make the case for it being a metal renaissance. So, that being said, I'm going to be playing some stuff here for you in the background from that era. I grabbed some CDs, grabbed some records. We're listening to Chaos Inception from 2012, very early Lava Dome Records, I want to say, released. The Abrogation, I think that's a Paul Giardi album artwork. Yes. Death metal from Alabama. But anyway, this was a short-lived band. I think they just had 2 full lengths. Love this record. Or album, I should say. But nonetheless, okay. So let's get to Logan's point. Do you think that 2012 to 2016 is a metal renaissance? I do not. So I disagree with him here, but he also mentioned that these are the years that he was in college. And I was not in college. So just, I think this is an interesting conversation because I do agree with him in the sense that I would actually venture to guess most people, whether you're into metal or not, but if you're just a diehard music person where you've been collecting physical media or you've been listening like in a kind of obsessive, passionate way that people like us who spend their free time watching YouTube videos with physical media collectors, we all, at least, I think, would it'd be fair to say that that time period in your life when you're 18 to 22 is incredibly important to you in terms of establishing your connection with music, with artists, developing tastes, things you like, dislike. So I can understand for Logan to say that that time period was crucial to him, and why he potentially has a perception that would be more favorable or of greater historical importance. So in that sense, I can see where he's coming from. And I'm a decade older, so I'm class of 2003 to 2007 were my college years. Whether you went to college or not is not really relevant, as much as that time period from in your late teens to early 20s. Anyone, whatever that is for you, if you were born in 1970, like years, whatever, 1988 to 1992 are going to be pivotal for you. And I think I wanted to feel a little bit more like, while I fundamentally disagree with him, it's not as crucial for me personally. I do want to kind of come to his defense in the sense that as someone who got into metal or is from a generation that really comes after the 2000s, I do feel like supporting not only his, or leaving room for his sort of conversation and point of view here, but for other people in the VC who are in their 20s right now, or even if there are any in their late teens, early 30s, who are younger than myself, who feel a greater sense of conviction and there's more historical or artistic importance that happens in the 21st century. We need those voices, and as much as I would potentially sort of back off of his claim, saying that this is like a crucial time period in metal's history, I also have enough like hesitation in being condemnatory towards that, because I'm getting old. Like, I hate to, I don't like to think of myself as, you know, someone who's aging out of relevancy, but at 40 years old, I'll be 40 here later this fall. I'm kind of getting to the point where, like, I have enough affection towards a time period that's 20 years old, and there are people who come before me who were, you know, born a generation or two, who I think are really crafting and sort of where metal has its most or greatest legitimacy, and I feel like there needs to be room for younger voices to push back against that. I'm kind of, you know, caught between two different places right now, where I went from being sort of the, you know, young kid in the 2000s in my 20s, sort of like trying to elbow room for bands of my generation to be considered great, and sort of they're from an old generation that had really grown up in the late 80s and 90s, and held on to that time period. So now here I am, 40. I'm looking at Logan claiming that these records are classic or should be considered sort of at this Renaissance period, and it's a decade old, and I kind of feel like it's too soon. They're too young. So I think it's important that we get, whether in the Metal VC or that music criticism in general allows for younger authors to sort of have their place in sort of drafting history. I think it's really important that they get a chance to speak their voice. So I'll end on that note and saying that I don't agree with you, Logan, but I am going to entertain this time period because I do have, you know, plenty of records from it that I do love, and I'll have them sort of playing in the background. We'll move on from Chaos Inception here, and we're going to move over to another record from that time period that I really love. This is Death Hammer's Evil Power. I'll get that out. I should say Chaos Inception, the abrogation, I think is in 2012. This is Evil Power. I want to say, I'll consult the Oracle here, but I want to say 2013, 2014. Am I wrong? But there were plenty of bands that were kind of venturing into this like blackened thrash. 2015, I'm sorry. There's Evil Power. Death Hammer from 2015. Yeah, like Vulture, I think Antichrist, Necromantheon, other bands that sort of were doing this style at the time. Anyway, while that's playing in the background, I want to come to, before I pull out some more records, I want to talk about the points that Logan brought up. So, point number one, comeback albums for 90s death metal. I think he showed is it Surgical Steel from Carcass? So for me, Carcass is the first three albums. Hey, that guy. Symphonies of Sickness is always going to be my favorite. Necroticism to me sounds like Symphonies Light, but I still think it's probably their second best record. Reek is crazy. A classic, but I really don't return to that very often. And after they venture into their sort of Melodeath era, I'm kind of no longer interested. Not that they're bad records, it's just not for me. So I think, but let's just zoom out. I want to return to the college thing a little bit. Because there was a lot of same conversation. The two records that come to mind from this era, or from my college era, were the Cannibal Corpse's Kill. Specifically, it was, I think, the first time they had Eric Rutan doing the production on that. and was seen as this like important record that came out in 2006. I want to say the same time period, there was a similar adjacent narrative with Stench of Redemption from Deicide, because Ralph Santolo had come over and he was playing like really sort of melodic, crazy lead, and Jack Owen had left Cannibal Corpse and moved over to Deicide, and it was like a different sound altogether since like the Hoffman brothers had left Deicide. Anyway, this was in 2006. They were talking about how like some of the more important records from these classic death metal bands, and they're sort of resurgent in America. I still have fond memories of those records. I don't know in terms of staying power. Like ultimately, the relationship that Cannibal Corpse developed with Rutan proved to be more important than necessarily kill the record itself. As he sort of produced the records for the years, and now he's joining the band with Pat O'Brien gone. I don't, Deicide as to whether, Ralph Santolo, I think, has since it's passed. I don't know if Jack Owen's still playing with the band. The Hoffman brothers, I believe, returned. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, I like the idea. I think Autopsy starts to come back in this time period, around, I think, 2012, maybe a little bit earlier. Autopsy gets together, and is resurgent. I 100% agree with him that 90s death metal as a sound was totally exploding, right? He mentioned, Horrendous. The first time I heard The Chills, I think that's a 2012 record. 2011, 2012. Yeah, it sounded just like death. So I don't agree with the idea of like that those classic death metal bands were absent in the decade, let's say, prior in the 90s. I would say as a sound, though, like 90s death metal, it was this old school death metal thing that sort of took off, for sure. I very much agree with that sentiment. Whether you're old bands putting together great records or new bands sort of forming and playing in a style that's informed by that time period, 100%. It's still a huge thing. But I've ranted about that enough on a previous video. If you're curious about my thoughts, you can see I put out a sort of discussion surrounding Dead Congregation and where death metal's sort of been over the past 15 years. The next point he raised was reissues. Now, specifically, he talked about Death and the reissues that came through on Relapse. Like, this didn't have a major impact on me, but I think it does have something to say about physical media collecting. So I'll take a pause there. I'll move from Death Hammer and we'll listen to something a little bit different. We're gonna move. I really like this from 2013. This is actually an earache release. It always surprises me. But this is Hour of 13, 333. So I'll put that on. There we go. So we got Hour 13 playing, 2013. We were previously just listening to Death Hammer with Evil Power. Keep the tunes rolling. Albums from that time period you can check out. So, reissues. The Death reissues that came out in Relapse were really, like, for me, unimportant. But what I do think it speaks to was, at this point in 2012, 2016, like, the vinyl sort of resurgence was a big deal. At least for physical media collectors, and it wasn't a big thing in 2003. I can say that, like, when I was going to school, Whether there were reissues or not is really inconsequential relative to like sort of the mass culture. Like I was just picking up, for the most part, CDs, and there were a lot of smaller underground, like specifically punk bands who didn't have CDs. They just had like 7 inches, or you'd go to a show and they'd have vinyl records for you, as opposed to CDs. So I think it's cool that Logan, kind of as someone who is getting more into music in general, also this part of like physical media collection sort of coincided in his life in a way that it didn't for me. I'm definitely like a digital generation. I grew up when CDs were, I moved from essentially tape cassettes to, when I was really, really young, to CDs in the early to mid 90s, and that was like my life. And then MP3 download, all that torrent stuff took over. And it wasn't until, really later in my 20s, mid 2000s, when physical media collecting really, started to take over in my life. So here, like, he's able to sort of ride this in a way. And if and I'll never forget going into House of Records in Eugene, Oregon, where I was going to school, and the guy at the counter was like, "You got to check out, Death's Human." But this was in early 2000s, and I went and I listened to it, digitally. I think I probably just listened to it on, MP3 for the first time, before I actually got a chance to pick up a physical copy of it, where he can sort of walk in and there's like all that information and access at his disposal, but he can also then match it to like a very physical media sort of thing. And like for someone his age who's picking up stuff, I think that's awesome. I should probably mention, like, I'll shout out, like, when I first started doing this YouTube thing, Devin over at Maze of Torment, was a younger guy. I think he's probably around Logan's age, like in his mid to late 20s, I've had to guess. But he's been doing this YouTube thing and collecting for a long time. Voices like his, or Patrick at Heavy Therapy, Eric, I think Psychic Vacuum is the name of his channel. I could be wrong about that. I apologize, Eric, if I got that wrong, but I'll put links to all their channels below, because they're younger people in this, younger guys in this space, and I think it's important to kind of encourage, right? Like, I want to know what they have to think. I don't personally, I spend a lot of my time listening to a generation that is older than me and learning from them, but I think I'm just at this point, like, as I get a little bit older, I kind of feel like, all right, I know a lot about the past. Like, I'm curious what younger voices have to say about what they hear and perceive in today's sort of music format, so music culture. So I'll shout out to their channels and link them in the description below. Nonetheless, I think that's just kind of the piece that I have in terms of reissues for his point. I didn't think that, like, at this point in time period, reissues were a major thing for me personally. Let's see, last point. Unique, soon to be classics was the third point. And I think that may be a good place for us to transition towards the records that I'm going to be showing here today. Because, I had this discussion when I was on Heavy Metallurgy. We talked about the year 2009, which is a really big year for me. It's not my college years, but bands that are really important to me released, like, what? So, Blut Nord's Memoria Vetusta 2, Dialogue with the Stars, Ulcerate, Everything is Fire, the debut record from Oranzi Pazuzu comes out that year, and Ruins of Everest with Foulest Seaman of the Sheltered Elite all come out in 2009.
And all those bands for me are like, you know, along with Stargazer, are those 5 bands for me sort of encapsulate a particular era where I feel it's like my generation's contribution to extreme metal. Forward-thinking bands that I kind of have grown with over the now decade plus, all got started for the most part, Blue Dot Snort being the exception, in the 2000s, really. I know Nagelfar preceded Ruins of Everest, but that's a different conversation. Where am I going with this? We had 2009, we had a discussion about how long a record needs to be out in order to be considered a classic, right? Like, it needs to sort of, over time, develop a certain kind of impact and influence. I am curious for some of the records that he chose from this era. You know, they're all approaching, if not older than a decade old, you know, and when we start to consider them classic, they've definitely been influential. And I think that'll be kind of our turning point here when we start to, I'll show off some records and ones that I think are not necessarily classic. I think we'll start with that as a conversation piece and then just talk about some records that are important. So for me personally, that is. We'll move from Hour of 13 and 333, and we're gonna listen to some death metal. This is some Swedish death metal with a corrosive carcass composition of flesh. That'll be next. All right. So records that, if not already, are considered classic, should be. Let's pull this out. We've talked about this on Album Club. Maybe I'll put a link to that discussion. You can hear Marty, Jim, and I gush about this band. Emerges out of Nagelfar, Alex von Millenwald, sort of the one-person band that with a bunch of different contributing members. When I first had someone describe this band for me, they were like crazy atmospheres. All they told me. I was like, okay. I thought it was gonna be like some atmospheric black metal thing. 100% not. It's just an interesting combination of death metal, black metal, doom. Wild record. You should check out Ruins of Everest. But I think Blood Vaults, along with Foulest Semen, I think is the band at its peak, and they haven't let me down. I'm definitely like a completist when it comes to Ruins of Everest. So let's stick with the idea of classic records. I think the next few, I'll try and pull a couple here that I would consider classic from different genres, and then we'll just talk about a few others that I think were important to me and I want to show off. Okay, so he was showing off the first Eternal Champion record, and yeah, 100% like, love it or hate it, it's like a Flashpoint record. In the same way that like Blood Incantation's Star Spawn is a Flashpoint record and is going to divide culturally people in a certain way, generate all sorts of emotion based on like ancillary or like contributing cultural factors that make up why you love it or hate it. Within the cavernous old school death metal thing, like Blood Incantation is the band that's probably been given center stage more than anyone else, and Eternal Champion within the new wave of traditional heavy metal, even though they're really an epic heavy metal band. I know they should be considered traditional heavy metal and epic heavy metal, and I have no problem navigating that contradiction. Next band. Okay. This is Satan and Life Sentence. I think this probably deserves to be considered in the same, like, if there was a comeback record of this time period, I think Life Sentence is probably the comeback record. Here Comes Satan, which a very limited impact. Maybe if you were interested in like tier B bands from no album, you had a Satan record, but they come back and like put out a record. It's interesting, probably divisive culturally as to where this record stands or how much credit should be given, but I will, at least in my memory, when it came out, it was a big deal. And the idea of like a band that had really been completely off the radar to return and make such an impact, the idea of like the metal community being hungry for this sound in 2013, an important record. In the same way, like I think because it's an older band catering to a younger audience, people don't think about it in the same way as it being like Eternal Champion. But an equally important record that I think should be, talked about in the same context. Here's one that I think, for my personal tastes, and it's kind of like a holdover from the previous decade of death metal. In the face of all this old school death metal fascination, in 2013 we get Passages in Deformity by Defeated Sanity. This is on Willowtip, I believe. Yeah. And I got that right. Yeah. Passages into Deformity. Wild album cover. This is another 2013 release. I think this is the best record from Defeated Sanity. But it was like, if you didn't want to lose touch with sort of the brutal and technical death metal that had preceded all the old school stuff that was happening at the time, this was like a record that crushes all the 90s stuff, or young bands wanting to sound 90s, I should say. Just like a really extreme record, and arguably for Defeated Sanity, while none of their songs are an easy listen, I think that's their third or fourth full length. They really come into their own on this one, and it's a classic brutal death metal contribution from this era. All right, for me personally, this goes 20. I mean, for me, this is a classic, but I don't know how many will agree. Nonetheless, I think 2014. I have to shout out Jurgen for this one. Church Within Records. Let's get this people. Look at that. This is, I'm sorry, Lord Vicar, Gates of Flesh. Crazy opens up deal there. Little booty. But anyway, in terms of traditional doom, there's no one doing it better than Lord Vicar. After the breakup of Reverend Bazaar, Finnish doom royalty, and I love this band. Gates of Flesh. It was really hard to find, and Jurgen over in Germany hooked me up. So big shout out to Jurgen. Thank you so much, man, for doing this. You've got Corrosive Carcass playing in the background. Let's switch it up. So let's go back to something a little bit more on the traditional side. We talked about this on Album Club, but this is the debut record from Sumerlands on Relapse. So from one sort of traditional record to another, this is Pharaoh, Bury the Light. I think this is 2013, 2012. Man, this man does not get enough conversation or light. Like, and is a classic example of moving from, one, like, they were carrying the torch for American power metal way before the new wave of, traditional heavy metal got going. Yes, it's like American power metal, but there's a level of like melodicism to this that's nowhere near the European side of thing. They've got their own sound, and they had been going since the like I think their first records in the early 2000s. Anyway, this is I think the third full length, third or fourth. Anyway, they've been going steady now for a couple of decades, I want to say, and because they're a little bit on the older side, or we're not a young band by any means, I think they kind of get put to the side and aren't given their due for sort of carrying the torch and bridging the gap from an older era of American power metal to a newer one. But like, they were on, this is a Cruz del Sur high roller, on a label at a time period before like the majority of it got rolling, especially in America, right? It was one thing if you were doing the traditional heavy metal thing in Sweden or in Canada, for example, but America was sort of a little bit late to the party, so for an American band to be doing its thing like this and kind of doing it under the radar out of the, passion and for the kind of music they were playing, before it was really like a big thing or a major cultural sort of like point of interest. Like, Pharaoh's awesome. Be Gone, I think the record that precedes this is probably my favorite. These are, like I'm saying, these are by no means like classics, but records that I love from this era. And for me personally, I wanted to sort of just talk about, and I haven't talked about like on a previous video or whatever. Being this is Metal and Beer Snob, I wanted to bring out, Logan. I was on the deep dive with Jeff over at Gas Masks and Hand Grenades. Clearing the Path to Ascend is my favorite Yob record. Being from Eugene, this is a band that I kind of grew up around. A hometown band sort of deal. But every single time, like, it's a trail running album for me. Always reminds me of the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to bring that up because it's now a band that I get to sort of link with Logan over a little bit, knowing that he's a fan. But this is 2014, and one that I couldn't do this without bringing it up, so I could give a little bit of a shout out to Logan with this one. This is an era that I think, right, that momentum starts to build with like the whole incantation fascination and all that good stuff. Which, whatever, take it or leave it, especially in 2024. But it was a big deal back then, and I think the Disma is around 2011, so maybe that precedes us a little bit. But in 2012, Macabre Kingdom from Spain's Putrevor comes out, and this is Dave Rotten of Extreme Records and Avulsed, along with the Roga Johansson, who's like in 5,000 bands, whatever. This is one of like a slow, grotesque, of everything that you would associate with bands who were trying to do that kind of style of death metal at the time. As much hype as the Disma record got, this sort of followed on its heels, and Dave Rotten's vocal performance is unbelievable on this. He sounds like it's like that death metal that's almost bordering on gore grind. Just how ugly it is, but through all of that sort of maze of death metal releases, Putrevor is the one I always sort of like gravitated towards. And here, this is like 12 years old. I will grab it if I want like an incredibly grotesque death metal record, and one that I would recommend for anyone interested in that kind of oozy death metal style. Yeah, so we'll move from Sumerlands. This is Emptiness with Nothing But the Hole. And what a cool record. Very unique. I mean, this is definitely a bit more on the extreme metal side of things.
And they've really changed to almost like a, I don't know, post-punky kind of ambient project. I can imagine they hang out at the same parties that Ulver goes to, but this is a super cool record, unique sound. 2014, I think is when this record came out. But that'll be playing in the background for you. Another favorite of mine from the era. Let's stick with an American doom metal project. This is the debut release from Magic Circle. Came out in 2013. And Armageddon Shop, so just I think a local Boston label. But, you know, I think it kind of precedes a lot of the interest in the new wave of traditional heavy metal in some ways. So, and it's very much like a traditional doom and like the Aussie style, right? You had bands like Count Raven, for example, who were really trying to just conjure up that kind of Sabbath era. And I think Magic Circle, they just only put out 3 albums. The last one in like 2019, 2020, I think. And then they've since disbanded. But this is probably their least polished effort. You would imagine it as a debut release, but I really dug this, and I think because the band was so short-lived, I don't know if they'll kind of continue to receive the level of acclaim. And there's a lot of bands that were doing doom during this time period. Man, doom doesn't not get a lot of love in general, being sort of like a genre that seems to favor a lot of limitations in terms of, you know, experimentation or whatever. But Magic Circle did it right. This is a great, if you like that sort of early Aussie era Sabbath, you should definitely check out Magic Circle. And, you know, for me personally, like when I was, the more I got into traditional heavy metal, a lot of those initial inroads was through doom. Magic Circle, you know, bands like, you know, Gates of Slumber, Doom Sword, while they all sound different, the Wounded Kings are sort of helping to sort of shape a way for me to sort of appreciate more traditional sounds in heavy metal, and Magic Circle is a part of that story for me. I'm most likely you've heard of this band, but I just kind of wanted to bring them back on your radar if you had missed them. 2 Finnish black metal records for us to talk about on very different sides of the spectrum. Like I already brought up Aranzi Pazuzu. So this is from 2014. Man, I'm going to butcher this. You got it. This sort of psychedelic experimental black metal coming out of Finland, a band that's known, or country that's known for its sort of orthodox approach to the genre. Really raw melodicism is what I associate usually with Finnish black metal, and they're just like a trip, completely outside of the norm. You can't really, like, for me, there are certain records like that debut full length from this band. I will always, you may recognize it with sort of like the cosmonaut on the cover, and that will always have like a certain special place for me. But you can't really go wrong with that band in my personal preference. So this is one I spun a lot, a band that I got more and more into during that time period, and that's kind of a good segue. So moving on from Emptiness, we're now listening to Spectral Lore and Sentinel. I mean, this project, A-Lost, releases, you know, not just Sentinel and 3, in a few years of one another. I think 2012 and 2014. Both are classics. Void Hanger, please put this out on vinyl. Like, this album artwork's crazy. I would love to like get a whatever triple LP of this to get that album artwork. But anyway, 2 records or 2 albums released from this project in that time period that I love. So we're listening to Sentinel right now in the background. And like I said, we moved from one finished black metal project to another. This is the last full length from Moon Sorrow. Jamaitan Aika? I think that's pronounced. But 2016. And you can see this has received some wear. I've listened to this record a bunch, but yeah, man, like another great pagan black metal band that has been around for a long time. It's almost been a decade since their last full length. If they go out on this record and there's no more to come, like, and they went on with an absolute killer record. This is super epic, and another band that like has been proven to be very consistent through the years, and was formative for me, kind of getting into a different style of black metal, and I really enjoyed sort of the size and scale of their albums. But if this is like, a lot of times it could be a piece of conversation is, often we've talked about bands who we enjoy their work, as they get older, as opposed to like their earlier material. And I don't know if you can say that about Moon Sorrow. I think they were pretty consistent through the years, and maybe you like some of their albums more than others. But maybe they end here and they're done as a band. A point of conversation is like bands that you could potentially say go out with their best effort, with being their last release. You can dispute me on that, but here we get like a Century Media release, so a major label. This is nothing like necessarily underground about this release, but it's an absolute success and triumph as a pagan black metal record. That wraps it up here, closing with some Spectral Lore and Moon Sorrow. So I guess, yeah, just summing up, while I don't necessarily agree with Logan, I appreciate, hey, younger voices, younger metalheads out there having their opinions expressed on like what we should be taking into consideration as sort of important or classic eras. And the cool thing about this is like, there's no, I don't mean to get like Aaron the Metal Theologian about this at all, but there's no sort of objective truth here. I'm more interested in like your subjective opinions and like emotional involvement and personal memories with records. So everything's welcome. I'll be sure to link Logan's channel below for his initial video, and then Rick's response as well. To Devin, Eric, Patrick, anyone who's out there who's potentially watching this that's was born born in the 90s and got into metal in the 21st century, like if you're part of the Metal VC, like be sure to watch Logan's video and jump in the conversation. That's all I got for you, and I'll see you guys later here soon enough. Got a couple of ideas right now sort of cooking on the back burner, but for another time. Until then, you can catch me every Wednesday night on Heavy Metallurgy. I'm talking about the Album Club. What'll be Marty Worm and Alan's channel for Album Club, and then I also do reviews over there, so you might be able to catch me. I haven't decided what I'll do for my next review yet. We'll see. But until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye.